More than 100 people have died so far. Press TV is banned, and the situation is now being called the Kashmir Intifada. If the Indian government had wanted to keep this latest crisis out of the media, Delhi's plans have seriously backfired. The violence is continuing to escalate, but still the international community remains silent. What will it take to get world leaders involved? Join me on the agenda for the answers with our expert panel. Critics of the Indian state say the Delhi government is in self-destruct mode over the issue of Kashmir. As the world hears the cries of Azadi or freedom reverberate around the picturesque valleys to the mountain tops, it appears India is in complete denial over the meltdown taking place in its occupied region. Kashmir is the big stumbling block which threatens to blow wide open Indo-Pak bilateral relations, and the escalating violence in which more than 100 innocents have already died at the hands of Indian forces through a summer of discontent doesn't look as though it will subside any time soon. India regards the situation as an internal issue, whereas Pakistan believes it is an international problem. In an unprecedented move of press censorship, India-administered Kashmir recently pulled the plug on Press TV, which was fast becoming the first news station of choice for independent coverage on the escalating violence. Despite this, the chants for independence grow ever louder in what many see as a long and sad saga of denying the Kashmiris their rights. Meanwhile, the international community remains a silent spectator. Obama last uttered the K word nearly 2 years ago, and the British Prime Minister David Cameron avoided any reference to Kashmir during a recent trade visit. Today's agenda asks the question, Kashmir, is it time for the international community to intervene? Well, it's one of the United Nations' oldest conflicts, but any signs of a resolution seem farther away than ever before. Kashmir is a hot topic, and it's one that most Western leaders are keen to avoid. But today's guests have no such reservations, starting with Mumtaz Rathore, who's a spokesman for the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, and he thinks no one is really listening to the people of Kashmir or asking them what they want. We're joined by Muzammil Ayub Takari, who is on the governing council of the World Kashmir Federation movement. He's recently returned from the region and is highly critical of the Indian government's media blackout, which he says is tantamount to cyber warfare. My third guest, Victoria Schofield, who is author of Kashmir in Conflict, believes the situation today is the result of India's neglect and Pakistan's meddling. Victoria, whose side are you on?
Well, that's a difficult question, but I think I'm really on the side of the Kashmiris, the people who live in the land which we call Pakistan-administered Kashmir, Indian-administered Kashmir. It was the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. And what we've seen over really 63 years is that this dispute, as it is, has been regarded as an Indo-Pakistani dispute. But in fact, the Kashmiris really are the unrepresented voice of the Kashmir dispute.
And they don't have a voice, do they? I mean, who listens to them?
Well, I think this is one of the difficulties, but certainly in the last 20 years since I've been covering the issue, the Kashmiri voice has become louder and louder. And I think what we're seeing on our television screens now is that it's in a way at its loudest. These demonstrations we're seeing in the streets are comparable to what was going on in the early 90s when the current insurgency against the Indian government began. But what's very difficult is that they don't tend to have an official voice. As I say, you have talks between India and Pakistan, but you don't really have this tripartite dialogue which the Kashmiris themselves have been asking for, really, for the last 20 years.
Rathore, who represents the Kashmiris?
What, in UK?
No, in Kashmir. There isn't really one charismatic leader, as in, you know, the Palestinians used to have Arafat, and there are various revolutionary leaders representing different groups, but there's no... Is this the problem with Kashmir? There's no one single person.
Well, I think you are quite rightly to say that there is not one voice in Kashmir, and this is the irony among Kashmiris, that we have to have a one voice, and which unfortunately it has not become a one voice. But there is a Hurriyat conferences we have in Kashmir, and a recent uprising which has started few months back. All the leader, most of them have become together, and the public is just backing them up, and there are 100,000 people come out in the streets of Srinagar.
Muzammil, this latest outbreak of violence has been described as the Kashmiri Intifada. Are there parallels with Palestine, or is this the wrong route to take?
I think there are some people that will want to compare it to Palestine, others think that it's not right. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what it's similar to. If we do find the similarities are the fact that there are human rights atrocities happening in both places. There is an occupational force, illegal occupational force in both places. And I think those similarities can be made. Other similarities may be there, they may not be there. But at the end of the day, I think there is one thing that we haven't really managed to do, is to realign ourselves with other movements out there that are facing similar problems to us. For example, the Palestinians. The Palestinian movement has been a very successful movement in terms of highlighting their issues, in terms of getting people onto the streets and being educated about their issues. Since 63 years. They had their issues starting from 1947, as well as the Kashmiri issues since 1947. And unfortunately, the Kashmiri movement has not been able to move as progressive as the Palestinian movement. And we do hope that we can get together on that, along with
Well, you say that, but then some Palestinians might say absolutely nothing has been achieved behind all the huge headlines that the Mideast conflict has attracted.
Rome was not built in a day, and I believe that no freedom struggle is going to achieve its logical end overnight. That said, the Palestinian movement may not have achieved its ultimate goal, but they are getting there, step by step, slowly. There has to be some level of patience, and I think both the Palestinians as well as the Kashmiris, we've shown a lot of patience, and hopefully maybe we should start working together and use our combined resources to achieve our goals.
Why do you think the international media hasn't focused on Kashmir, say, as much as Palestine or other areas of conflict?
I think it's an obvious, in a way, area of neglect, because it doesn't have the same resonance as Palestine, and many people will say there's no oil in the Kashmir region, whereas there's oil in the Middle East. And I myself would also prefer not to go too much down the comparison line. I think we've heard from Muzammil in terms of human rights and an unresolved conflict, but I actually think the Kashmir issue is unique. It's one of a kind in that it relates to, as we know, the arrangements for partition in 1947, and Kashmir was left as an unresolved dispute. And much as it's moved on, the issue has moved on, we're looking at a different generation, there are still elements of what was left unresolved. And it was essentially whether this area, this former princely state, should become part of Pakistan, whether it should become part of India. At the same time, you had a freedom movement, and this is what we're really looking at now, and the Kashmiris feel that they've got this right of self-determination. A UN plebiscite was promised, and it's never been held. Well,
you mentioned 1947, so let's go back and find out how it all began, and check out this brief history narrated by Muhammad Walji.
It was the signature of the Maharaja Hari Singh which ignited the blazing 60-year row between India and Pakistan. Back in 1947, when both countries won their independence from Britain, he made it quite clear Kashmir held the same political ambitions for Azadi, or freedom. However, he was persuaded to sign over the territory to the Indian government in return for military aid and a promised referendum. That single act fanned the flames of the dispute, which has raged over 6 decades and caused 3 India-Pakistan wars. The first in 1947-48, the second in 1965 and in 1999. India fought a brief but bitter conflict with Pakistani-backed forces who had infiltrated Indian-controlled territory in the Kargil area. By the late 80s, a growing movement of armed resistance against Indian rule in Kashmir attracted young Muslim men from across the world. In the meantime, Islamabad continues to claim that Kashmir should be part of Pakistan based on the fact that Muslims are in the majority of the region. Kashmiris say they should be allowed to vote in a referendum on their own future, following numerous UN resolutions on the issue. The only thing both India and Pakistan agree on is to reject the option of Kashmir becoming an independent state. However, India dismisses all other claims and continually points to the instrument of accession signed in October 1947 by the Maharaja Hari Singh as proof of ownership.